You're listening to the official podcast of Bloodstock Open Air Festival. Bloodstock Radio.
Just walk away. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Bloodstock Radio, the official podcast of the Bloodstock Open Air Festival. My name is Squatter, and this is podcast number 57, opening you up there with some Metal Church with a track called By the Numbers from last year's album Damned If You Do. And they are, of course, performing at this year's Bloodstock Festival on the main stage on Friday, which is going to be only their second Bloodstock appearance after appearing way back in 2006. Okay, on tonight's podcast, we are going to be having our usual Metal to the Masses roundup, plus some music from a former Bloodstock headliner who have recently been playing over here in the UK, and from one of their support bands. But the majority of this week's show is going to be taken up by a chat with the former Metal Hammer editor Alexander Milas. I thought I'd get him on the show as I know that he's quite a big fan of Bloodstock, and obviously he could talk about his time at Metal Hammer, but I didn't realise that he had quite so many strings to his bow, including a brand new project that he's just launched this week. And he's also a very engaging speaker. So let's have our Metal to the Masses roundup first of all, and then we'll be back talking to Alex Milas after that. This is the Bloodstock Radio podcast, and you're very welcome to it.
Metal to the Masses update.
Hi there, Dan Barrett here, Resident Soundboy for DB Sounds with your Metal to the Masses Essex update. After a brilliant night and fantastic show from all the bands that took part with the first heat done and dusted, we have our first two bands through to the semi-finals. Congratulations to Goat Monsoon and Collected. Thanks to everyone that came down to our first heat, the turnout was spectacular. If you missed the first heat, fret not. Heat 2 kicks off on Friday the 1st of February with more bands to go into the semi-finals. You can find out more over on Facebook at Metal to the Masses Essex. Till then, stay heavy.
Hi, Jake from Metal to the Masses Sheffield here. Well done to Dominion of Ashes and Fear December for going through to our semi-final round. This week, a little bit different, as the bands will pull the blades out and fight on February the 3rd at the Mulberry, £5 as always, so we'll see you there.
The Big Interview.
Okay, this is Squatter on Bloodstock Radio, the official podcast of the Bloodstock Open Air Festival. And next up, we're having a chat with the Dark Lord himself, Mr. Alexander Milas. How are you doing, mate?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's good to be back with the Bloodstock Radio. We have a little bit of a wind down and a bit of a break after the festival because we haven't got that much to announce, or Metal to the Masses doesn't get going yet. So we start again in the new year. So we're just getting back into these again now. So I'm getting the rust, scraping it off.
Very good news. Well, I'm very happy to scrape with you.
Yes, cool. Okay, so I don't really know where you've got so many strings to your bow. I don't really know where to start. So I suppose Bloodstock's probably the best place to start, because the last time I think I saw you for a chat was in the Sophie tent early on Thursday at Bloodstock last year, when you were checking out where you were going to be doing your DJ set over the weekend, and that was a new idea that we introduced. So how did that go?
Oh, man. Well, that was a lot of fun for people that did make it down, or maybe, they can't remember for whatever reasons. Yeah, we decided to have a little approach about, how do you make it interesting? How do you kind of maybe change things up? And so we came up with this idea called the Ages of Metal. And so each night, a different DJ would choose a different decade. And, somehow, magically, I fell into the 1980s slot, which was, of course, a joy, because, of course, not to say that I'm not always listening to new things, but that's when I fell in love with heavy metal. So that era, I think, will always be important to me, not just because of what I was into, but also because what my siblings were into. So it reminds me of childhood.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, it looked like a good idea, because obviously Bloodstock are always trying to reinvent things, and that's what I like about it. They're never sort of happy to just sit still. This works. It's always like coming up with new ideas. We had the films there last year as well in the New Blood 10, and then they had these DJ nights. So I'm glad to hear that they went well anyway.
Oh, indeed. Well, and I think what sets Bloodstock apart from so many festivals, and I think why it keeps growing, why people keep coming back, while it feels like a family affair and a community, is because they take such great care of people. You know, if it was just about the bands, anyone could do it, but because they've created a family, people keep coming back. And so it's those little touches that I think make it so special, and why for so many people, including me, it feels like coming home every year.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, I only went for the first time in 2013, believe it or not. So I'd never really been before, and I only went because Zentrix, my favourite band, got announced for that, and they just reformed. So I don't know why, but I'd just not really come on my radar. Really, I'm a thrash fan, but never really had. So yeah, so 2013, and then by 2016, I was sort of doing Bloodstock TV and interviewing bands there. So they really do that, you know, that by the fans for the fans motto that they have. That really does work.
Oh, there's definitely no question there. I mean, I think what has happened with, I think, a lot of music fans, not just metal fans, but I think especially metal fans, is, you know, when you're being sold to, you know, when you're being sold an idea, there's a sincerity and honesty to what Bloodstock do. I think because it's a transparent organization. I think it's because they have grown incrementally, you know, and to be honest, you know, they've also listened to their community. I think that's why people have such an investment in it all, because they feel like they've been a part of their success. I mean, I can think of a few bands that also enjoy that kind of relationship with their fans, and it's very rare, because it feels like seeing them up on stage isn't elevating them. It feels like a shared triumph. And I think for a lot of Bloodstock fans, seeing the festival do well is a feeling of shared victory. And, you know, I certainly feel that each year as I see the lineups come out, and it just gets better and better. It's just like, fuck yeah, that should be happening.
Yeah. So it's where to start, really. I mean, you mentioned about the 80s metal and that sort of thing. So just in terms of your journey of getting into metal in the 80s, and then how your journey got you from that bit to being the sort of editor of Metal Hammer, and obviously coming over to the UK and doing that. So it was a bit of potted history.
Wow. I mean, it's weird. I mean, if you've seen Forrest Gump, you'll know where I'm coming from. I mean, I grew up in Italy because my dad was in the U.S. Navy, and, you know, access to music wasn't the easiest thing in the world. And so you tend to covet and almost fetishize the stuff that you did had, you know, and, you know, I had an older brother, 2 older sisters. They were all into like their rock and metal. My brother was like a massive Scorpions fan. And, so I just remember being a kid and being fascinated by this world that I was slowly being introduced to. And I'll never forget, one day he sat me down in his room. He had like a room way down in the basement that he insisted on living in, so he could kind of have that semi-independent lifestyle. Cause, you know, I mean, he was like 17, so, you know, big man, right?
Yep.
And I said, you're going to have to listen to this song in a different way than you had anything else, because it's something that you weren't ready for before, but now I think you're ready to understand what this is all about. And he's like, it's going to be a little different from what you're used to, but trust me, it's important. And it was Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. And I'll never forget that feeling, like the genuine sensation of the torch being passed, saying, you know, you're ready to step into this world. And that's what I really credit so much of my love of heavy metal toward, is just the brilliant sense of inclusion, you know, the brilliant sense of family that kind of came with being introduced to it all. It was more than just music on a cassette. It was the beginning of a journey for me, you know. So fast forward, you know, I got way into playing music. I got way into playing bass, you know, in various bands growing up in Italy. But then I actually began to study archaeology, which is what brought me to the UK about 3 degrees later. I was at UCL, and I completed my master's in material culture, but I had a falling out with my advisor, and so I decided, what am I going to do now? You know, because I kind of had my fill of academia. And by that point, I had a sideline writing, which included a burgeoning sideline writing for Kerrang! Magazine, you know, because alongside the rather brilliant Dom Lawson, who was writing around that time, they didn't really have people in London who were willing to stand around the underworld, for instance, to review like death metal all-dayers. This is probably like 2002, 2003. Okay. And, you know, so I kept at it, you know, with some incredible generosity of people working at the magazine, you know, Dave Everly, people like Ben Myers, you know, is now a very successful novelist. They brought me through, and you know, I guess having a real grounding of love, because I mean, I was a through and through absolute dyed the wool, you know, heavy metal fan. You know, one thing led to another. I did my first feature on Enslaved. They were doing like a page interview with Enslaved, and you know, well, before I knew it, I was doing cover features. And you know, fast forward 2-3 years later, I was kind of writing 7 days of the week, and I got pulled into Hammer because they had a job going as features editor. A year later, the editor left. I went for the job, and I'm 42 years old now, and I look back at my 30s as a bit of a carousel blur. But I like to think in that time I did more than just edit the magazine. I like to think that I kind of stayed true to the initial calling that I felt when I was just sitting down with my brother in his little basement bedroom. Just like that feeling of thinking of metal as something that was special, of heavy music something that is family, because that's how I've always seen it. It's always just been about that inclusion.
That's quite a journey that you've done in a relatively young age, and that. Is that the sort of dynamic that's at that sort of level? Is it are there many older guys still in that sort of industry, or is it younger guys coming through?
Oh, well, I think there's definitely an incredible generational thing. I mean, there's so many people that I am completely grateful and indebted to for, giving me, various kind of legs up, helped me through various stages of what you can sort of loosely call a career. I was just so lucky, that, one person hired me, another person told me about an opportunity, whatever else. But, it's people like, for instance, Jerry Ewing, the editor of Prog magazine, who was hugely encouraging of my decisions back in the day. Malcolm Dome, literally, one of the men who more or less is the architect of metal journalism, being so behind the idea of me going for some of these jobs. Just like there's so many people without whom I wouldn't have been able to do any of this, who kind of like deserve the credit. And these are people, who were significantly older than I am. I think Malcolm's first published piece was in, 1978, and I was 2 years old at that point. Yeah. And so I think what you register as you get a little older is that, there's a beautiful, almost David Attenborough, like, kind of like replenishing of the ranks. It's so brilliant to go to Bloodstock and see people absolutely blitzed out of their mind on Jägermeister on the Barrier and just think, oh yeah, that used to be me. It's like the heavy metal circle of life, Yeah. And so you realize, okay, maybe I'm not crowd surfing and I'm not at a gig every night of the week. But what's wonderful is to see so many great young minds coming up through the ranks and just doing, fantastic bits of journalism, fantastic bits of broadcasts, fields that have changed significantly from even the time when I started out, which doesn't feel that long ago. But, it is a long time ago if you're half my age. And so, I think, there's a melancholy for what is past, but there's also an excitement about what's next.
Do you think that sort of route still exists? Because obviously, you talk to younger up-and-coming bands now, and in the same way that sort of music labels don't necessarily invest in bands the way that they used to sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago. And, my son is actually 16. He wants to get into sports journalism, but again, I'm just wondering that sort of journalistic route, the same with music journalism, is that sort of thing still there, or is it are there fewer positions in this sort of thing with the advent of the internet and online blogs and video blogs and whatever else you can do now?
Oh yeah, well, there's no question that things have changed fundamentally. Just like in a way that, is, I think, unprecedented. Look at the printing press, for instance, right? That is an invention that radically altered Western thought, and the reverberations, will continue to go for centuries. The changes that we have seen in our lifetimes are so radical. The idea of instantaneous global communication is completely taken for granted. But to a kid who's 15 years old, it's just the way things have always been, right? But, if you remember what it was like just having to make arrangements and turn up at a specific time, not proceed every time you're meeting someone with 20 texts about where you're going to be and what time you're going to show up, you know how radically things have changed. And we're not talking about ancient history here. We're talking about 2006. Yeah. And that is mind-blowing. And, this is the kind of thing that, as a person who got into print journalism, back in the day, I've definitely been privy to firsthand, because I remember, the Metal Hammer website featuring a story that was in the current issue of the magazine, and people absolutely losing their mind. Like, what are you going to do if you put it on the internet? No one's going to buy the magazine. What do you mean you published a story that's current? Because at that point, it was literally like it was the arrogance and hubris of the Titanic. And I am not exaggerating this. The publishing industry was a gigantic, bloated, but still hugely profitable industry. Like, literally, they had no idea that the world wasn't changing. It had already changed. Like, literally, the iceberg had torn the hull from, tip to stern. And literally, they were about to sink. And, within 10 years, things had radically changed. And it's not to say that print journalism had gone down, but its role had changed, because suddenly the status as gatekeepers on music or news or whatever else, had changed for better or worse. There is absolutely no question that people are looking at the palm of their hands before they are looking at print. And so that isn't to diminish its importance, but I think it's to highlight what print can do is analysis and depth. In the case of music journalism, great interviews, great photography, all the things that make print journalism great are still things that are valuable. But the ability of print to break stories, to offer exclusives when you're competing with something that is updating literally every second of the day, that's something that me and a lot of other people, we kind of killed ourselves to try and do, but there was simply no way. And so what you got in the beginning was people trying to create bite-sized journalism and things that kind of mimicked what you saw online, just like in terms of their kind of, their shallowness or superficiality or whatever else. Just you can't write long articles because no one's reading long articles anymore. In fact, I think the best magazines around these days are going in the opposite direction. They're doing even longer articles because the people who buy them are the ones who are after the very things that print can still do better than anything else, because print is a technology. So in answer to your question, yes, I think there are opportunities there. Do they look like what they did 15 years ago? Absolutely not. I think you have to be a master of a lot of different trades. A bit of broadcast, you have to know how social media works. You have to know how to write headlines, articles. It's still about asking great questions. It's still about having a nose for a good story. And if you're a music journalist, hopefully good taste in music. But the idea of, making a living off of print journalism alone is probably going to be more challenging now than it ever has been. And I don't think it's ever been easy.
Yeah, I think it's similar to radio, I suppose, as well, really, because when the Team Rock situation happened and the radio station went and the print went, it was almost like one of those, is that the end of it all? Is it really sort of signalling the end of things and that? And I know, some of them have come back in certain ways. I mean, I'm good friends with the guys at Primordial Radio that have risen from the ashes of that, and they're trying to do radio in a different way. But it's just, is it just the case that everyone wants that instant? You said about the 15-year-olds now. Are they going to wait for a magazine to come out for 2 weeks to read a review of a gig they went to when they can get it on their phone virtually when the bands have walked off stage?
Yeah, it's I think it's a question that we've all tried to answer. I mean, the truth is, I think that there are a lot of people of, let's just say, of an age, and I'm one of them, where you're probably privy to conversations where it's just, you're getting old when someone begins a sentence, or you find yourself beginning a sentence with the words "the kids these days," because it's just a normal thing, because you don't understand what are they up to, what are they doing, and all that. And I think kids will always go for the things that work the best, because that's just how things always worked. I mean, look at how tape trading worked, back in the 80s and 90s. Like, literally the entire underground scene would not exist were it not for this unbelievable, this complex system of underground tape trading that, was literally like the entire basis of the extreme metal underground. I mean, that wasn't something that was monetized. That wasn't something that propped up the industry. I mean, it produced some of the most important bands of all time, but it was something that was completely self-generated and based on the community of metalheads, which is why I think metal is almost a law unto itself. I think it exists, in its own ecosystem apart from, any other genre, because it isn't just a genre, and I think for that reason, like the rules that kind of apply to all the other media, all the other genres, don't really apply to, metal in quite the same way. And so, while I do kind of feel like it's sad that, magazines, kind of don't exist as they were. I mean, you look at kids these days, it's like, well, why should they only buy magazines? Because, they're talking to each other. They're sharing information. They're sharing music. I mean, look at the incredibly collaborative progressive metal bands, where it's just like, I remember talking to a band years ago called Sky Harbor, where literally they were rehearsing over FaceTime in multiple time zones, and just bringing like an incredible panoply of skills together under one roof that simply wouldn't exist without the benefit of technology. And so, I think while it is easy to lament the things that we have lost, I think it's also equal cause to celebrate the things that we have gained, stuff that just wouldn't exist, without these incredible technologies. I mean, there's no turning the clock back. There's no question about that. There will always be a place for print, I think, because people will always value quality journalism. But I think there are other platforms that can support the music really powerfully. And I think that's a really exciting thing.
Yeah. That's probably the most of the music I want to speak to you about. But you talk about the future in technology and that lot, and you've got a massive interest in space that I can see. I can see that you're a sort of half music, half astronaut kind of thing. And obviously a deep love of Star Wars for anyone that's got you on Facebook and things like that as well. So where does that come into it? From an archaeologist, music guy, then going into the space side of things as well. So where's the love of that come from?
Well, you're really kind. I mean, to be honest, it just comes from my dad. Going to the Air and Space Museum in D.C. where we were living, and I remember around the same time a film called The Right Stuff came out, and it was just all about Chuck Yeager, who broke the sound barrier, and the Gemini program, which was like a precedent to the Apollo program, and that and coupled with going to the Air and Space Museum, which is just basically full of things like the SR-71 Blackbird and, Saturn V boosters. I mean, just like when you're an 8-year-old kid, it blows your mind, And I think that just it kicked off a lifelong fascination with air travel, with space flight. I'm a huge aviation buff, but I'm also a massive fan of space stuff as well. And, I couldn't have been more pleased to have worlds collide than I think it was back in like 2014, maybe 2015 now. We were planning the Metal Hammer Golden God Awards, and there's an award that I created called the Spirit of Hammer Award, which is kind of anointed to people who we felt weren't musicians but somehow embody the spirit of heavy metal, and we gave it to various people over the years, like Sir Christopher Lee, Brian Blessed, who turned up and brought the house down. One year I discovered there was a project scientist for the European Space Agency's Rosetta mission. If you're not familiar with it, the Rosetta mission basically landed a probe on a comet, which is quite literally the equivalent of landing a bullet on another bullet if the bullet's traveling 6 times faster than bullets have to travel. So to give you an idea, I mean, it's an incredible feat. And as it turned out, the project scientist on that mission was actually from Manor Park in London, and it was a gigantic metal fan. And so we invited Matt down, and we got Brian May to present the award to him, because, of course, Brian May was also a fellow alumnus of Imperial College. Yep. And the effect was just unbelievable, because Brian delivered this absolutely knockout speech, and Matt came out. It was a really emotional moment, but it just felt like, what a fantastic example of what metal fans are capable of. Anyone who's in media or has seen the way that metal is portrayed in media knows that the expectation 50 years later is just that we're a bunch of uneducated and drooling savages, and so it's just like when there are people out there representing who we can be and what we are capable of in such a positive and inspiring way, I think that's worthy of acknowledgement. And so that itself felt like an incredibly gratifying experience. But then Matt and I, we became great friends, and we started talking about, what are we going to do about Rosetta? Like literally this Philae lander had landed on the comet, and it was basically going to run out of battery and float in space for like 1 billion years and fall into the sun, which seemed kind of sad. And so it's just like, why don't we do a going away party? And I was like, why don't I get a band to play? Maybe we get 2 bands to play. And then, like, before you know it, I was talking to the European Space Agency. I had left Hammer by that point. And, it was the birth of Space Rocks, which is quite literally a celebration of space exploration and the art and music that inspires. And, we had our first event last April, which is fun, and we have more on the way.
Wow, that sounds. I mean, I had a little bit of a look at it, but I wasn't really sure what it was. And I was looking at it, I wasn't sure if it was a space, like a convention where all people turn up in Star Trek outfits, or if it was, because it's not really my sort of thing. Space, I don't really know that much about it. But so, what sort of things went on at the actual event then?
Well, it was literally like think of it almost as a little festival of space, a little celebration. But there's so much art, there's so much music, there is so much culture, writing that's inspired by space. So we had authors, we had actors and actresses. Brian May came down, astronaut Tim P came down, Helen Keane, fantastic science communicator. We had a band called Lonely Robot Play, who are fairly heavy, albeit probably more of a prog band than anything else. It's John Mitchell's band. And it just all kind of came together in this beautiful whole, something that felt like, a celebration of space. A lot of people, kind of take it as like a bit of a science fair, and it's not that. It's just something that's designed to kind of please kids of all ages who are into this kind of stuff. And a lot of them who aren't into this kind of stuff, but, they kind of came down and had their eyes open to just how extraordinary this human journey is, because it's not just about exploring space. It's about understanding humanity's place in the universe as well. And, not many people always realize that a lot of what space exploration is about these days is about human Earth observation, about, observing the changes in climate, for instance, from one decade to the next, understanding how our ecosystem works. So it's not just about, discovering what's out in deep space. It's about understanding our own world as well. And these days, that just seems more important than ever. And so things like space rocks, again, just like, I think what a lot of the things that made me love working for Metal Hammer were all about, it's stuff that I care about, stuff that I feel that it's important.
Yeah, so it's great to be able to do that, isn't it? You're doing something that you're passionate about. You get to go and work on something that you're passionate about, rather than a job you've got to do and you can't stand.
Indeed. Well, look at Bloodstock. I mean, just talk about a labor of love. I mean, there's no question that it has to operate a successful business, but that says nothing of the belief behind it all, that makes it work. I mean, Simon Hall, great example, a man who will work, I'm sure 72 hours in a row he has to make things happen. And that's what makes things like Bloodstock or anything worthwhile tick. It's the passion and belief of the people behind it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I absolutely love being involved in it. I mean, it was Simon that invited me to do Bloodstock TV first of all, and then Bloodstock Radio as a sort of follow up to that. But it is that sort of passion with it, and it's really genuine. It's not like it's I go around all the Metal to the Masses finals with him and that. I went to, I think, about 7 or 8 with him last year, and just sort of following him around, and so the number of miles that he does to go around and that whole Metal to the Masses thing. I think actually, I know that you're a supporter of it, because I think it was the first place I met you was at one of the Metal to the Masses London gigs at one point at Nambucca, I think.
Indeed.
And yeah, that sort of community thing of not forgetting where you came from, and that sort of grassroots, and pulling these bands up every year. I think we've got 31 Metal to the Masses regions this year, and not a lot of festivals do that. So it sort of reflects the festival, that sort of attitude.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it represents an investment in the community, and just like the thing is, it's impossible to fool people. If you give a shit, it will be completely obvious. And I think that's why Bloodstock works, is because there's a reinvestment in the community. There's a lot of things that it doesn't have to do, but it seems to just do it anyway. And things like Metal to the Masses, I think, are a brilliant example of that, because it gives new bands a platform, but it also kind of continues that feeling year round, just like it never ceases to blow my mind just how quickly it comes around each year. It's just like, well, Bloodstock's over, and then the machine begins working almost immediately to begin promoting the next one. And that's incredible. I mean, just like, what a wonderful success story, that this exists, in an incredibly competitive market. I mean, just especially, I think, as, the sales of recorded music, are slowly diminishing and so on. I mean, there's no question that live markets become incredibly saturated. And so they aren't steady waters that Bloodstock has come up in. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what sets it apart? What makes it different? And why is it successful in, what you could say is a slightly hostile environment? And I think it is always down to one thing, and that's just the belief and the passion of its community.
Yeah, absolutely. And community is the word that if you ever ask someone, what one word would you use for Bloodstock, community is definitely the one. And the metal to the masses, and that's how I got involved, because it's a thing that I'm passionate about, the sort of up and coming, and it just fits in with my ethos of things. And that's what I mean. You say about the work starting, that's why we cover the metal to the masses so strongly on Bloodstock Radio, because as great it is, the New Blood stage, the majority of punters that are at the festival will mainly find bands by just sort of wandering past and hearing what they hear and wandering in. And what we're trying to do is we feature all of the winners, so all of the winning bands, we'll have a short interview with them and we'll play some of their music, so that people go into the festival in advance will say, oh, I like the sound of them, and they'll mark them down on their clash finders before they go, to try to get them up there and to try to get them so that they're competing with the headliners rather than just being found as people wander past.
That's it. But I mean, how many festivals are capable of doing that, of accommodating so many, and just like bringing them to the table in such a democratic way, I mean, I think what's brilliant is that it gives everybody like a feeling of participation. Like if you went down to support, you were a part of that booking, it's not just like an organization arbitrarily plunking bands on the bill saying we think you're going to like it. It's just like, here's your stage, and here are the bands that you guys chose. And I think that's unique.
Yeah, no, I think it is, and it's obviously representing their region and that, so it works anyway, so more power to it.
Indeed.
One other thing I wanted to get from you before you go is I know that you're massively passionate about your heavy metal truants, and I know a lot of people don't know about what goes on with that, and obviously we want to try and raise as much awareness about that, so just give us a brief overview of what that is and how people can get involved.
Well, you're really kind. I mean, heavy metal truants is like I lead a double life. I've got other things that I work on, but heavy metal truants it's a charity cycle ride between London and Download Festival every year. It's a raffle that we do every year. It's also an auction that we do every year. We've had incredible support from Bloodstock and the community over the years, but it was all founded in literally the deserts of Morocco. I was out there on a truants ride, which is a ride that was founded by Rod Smallwood, who manages Iron Maiden. And, he invites people down every year to sort of cycle in random places around the world. And, we were having a beer, and he asked me, well, what do you think? I said, Rod, this is absolutely brilliant, but you know what? I wish I could invite, more people. I wish, we could do something that was like kind of open. And it was like 100%, let's figure it out. Let's do it. And so we co-founded a ride that's now in its 7th year. We've raised about £629,000 for Teenage Cancer Trust, Childline, and Nordhoff Robbins, and it has 100% come from the rock and metal community. We cycle nearly 200 miles northward. We auction items, and we host other sorts of events as well. For instance, we just had our first ever heavy metal curry with Biff from Saxon. We called it a meal of steel.
That works.
And we're planning a few more. It's just like, if you've been around charities, you'll know that, they usually do things like gala dinners and stuff, and it didn't feel right. So we came up with something else. And so, the heavy metal curry was it. And it was a huge success. Biff was absolutely brilliant to hang around with. I think he gave a lot of Saxon fans an experience that they won't forget. It's just like, for the rest of our lives, it's like, that time we had a curry with Biff. So we're hoping to do a few more of those and, climb the pulpit. But if you saw the work that these charities do, you realize you're not in for a penny. You're definitely in for a pound once you sign up for this thing. And so it's great because it's 100%, governed and run by metalheads. And, that's why we're still here 7 years later.
Cool, excellent. Well, that sounds great. I hope people get involved in that. Have you got any exciting projects coming up for in the near future you can tell us about, maybe?
Wow, gosh, well, there's a lot. Look, you're really kind because you're kind of asking me, about various things that I'm really proud to work. And I have to say, nothing that I do isn't without a huge amount of help from other people. And one of the things I'm perhaps most excited about announcing soon is really purely a product of community and people just sort of stepping up. And it's called World Metal Congress, and it's all about the global metal community, which if you ever read Hammer, or if you still do, you'll know that, we had a big thing going in the magazine for a long time, and a lot of other organizations have as well, about promoting music from around the world, because one of the things you discover if you're really into metal is obviously that lots of it comes from places that you wouldn't necessarily assume are big metal places, I had my eyes opened when I went to Mumbai for the first time in like 2008, 2009. And, and then you discover, wow, there's heavy metal in Afghanistan. There's heavy metal in Syria or Botswana or Malaysia or Indonesia. And like the list goes on. And it is phenomenal how these DIY scenes have come about and how they sustain themselves almost independently of any major kind of commercial support, because again, it's like the purest expression of metal's ability to survive no matter what. It's like this kind of like radioactive proof, immortal organism, this music, because, it exists in war zones. And more important than that, there are people who are willing to risk jail time, to risk their lives in order to play it. And so World Metal Congress is all about bringing, sort of like East and West together, the decision makers, musicians, the academics, and all those sorts of people. We're announcing it real soon. And the point of it is just to kind of just, I guess, help the conversation along, because, I always felt, and I continue to feel like there's a lot of music that's being overlooked simply because of where it's from. And so we're trying to help that. But I think we're also trying to shout about how much music, how many brilliant festivals are out there. I mean, I did back from Nepal, where I was at Silence Festival, and you wouldn't believe, like, Nepal is the most metal country in the world. Okay, maybe not the most, but I mean, it's up there. Yeah. Just like the fans are absolutely up for it. I've just never seen anything so inspiring. And this is a country that's been kind of beset by corruption, literally flattened by an earthquake back in 2015, which is how I first came aware of it. And it's just, you wouldn't believe the kind of passion that the kids feel for it. And I was out there to see a band called Underside, who they sound like Lamb of God. They're on tour with Cancer Bats, but Cancer Bats, who are on tour, presently, did one of their secret Bat Sabbath sets, where they basically just cover Black Sabbath, end to end for about 90 minutes. And to see a room full of Nepalese kids, I mean, I'm not talking about, gray bearded, kind of 40, 50, 60 something, original Black Sabbath fans. Like, literally, these are kids probably 16 to 20, and they're all going completely nuts at this set. They know every word, they know every drum fill, like everything. And it's just like, gosh, there's something really special about metal, isn't there? But to see it firsthand, it never ceases to kind of inspire me and leave me feeling energized. And so that's why World Metal Congress exists, is to kind of try and convey that excitement, because it really is exciting out there.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'd definitely like to, keep us involved in that, because obviously we had Underside played at Bloodstock last year, and we had a few interviews with Lena Khatib, who you probably know, whom she interviewed a few bands from Syria and from Iraq and Lebanon, where she's from. And yeah, when you talk to these bands, you do realise that underground is a completely different meaning over there. When you can get arrested or shot for wearing a heavy metal t-shirt, then yeah, that's a very, very different thing. So that sounds like a really worthwhile project, and yeah, we'll definitely keep us in touch with that, and we'd like to hear more about that.
Oh, my partners in World Metal Congress, if it has a familiar, that's why, because she's one of these people that's been flying the flag brilliantly for it all for so long. And other partners as well, Niall Scott, who is literally a professor of philosophy, at the University of Lancashire, who is also responsible for one of the world's first ever academic conferences on heavy metal. And so we've got like a really great Venn diagram that covers off, politics, media, as well as academia and so on, because there's so many different areas that this touches on. Why does it exist? How does it exist? Why is it important? And so we won't be able to answer every question, but we are hoping is we can start a conversation in a bigger way than has ever been ascribed to this. I want to call it an issue, because It's not a problem, but it's an incredible phenomenon. I mean, this shouldn't happen. This shouldn't exist. This is music from Birmingham. How does it pop up in Afghanistan? I mean, that's mind-blowing to me. And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, cool. That sounds great. Well, that's all good. Cheers for talking to us about all that. Say there's probably loads more that we could go on with, but I know you're a busy man, so I'll let you get on with things. But cheers for talking to us.
Well, everyone's got stuff to do, but I really appreciate you taking the time for me. And, I'll look forward to having a beer out in Derby, if not before then, okay?
Is there any music you'd like us to play out with? Shall we play out with some Underside?
I would absolutely love to play some Underside. Just a phenomenal band all the way from Nepal. I mean, who truly live and die by the music they play. And so that'd be a fantastic way to go out.
Okay. Cheers for talking to us, Alex.
Thank you, man. Have a great old night.
Hey, what's up? This is Frank Bello from Anthrax, and you are listening to BloodstockRadio.com. Turn it up!
Okay, so that was the Nepalese band Underside, who we had at Bloodstock on the Sunday last year. And that was a track called Scare from their album Satan in Your Stereo that came out just over a year ago, as requested by our special guest this week, Alexander Milas. And since we recorded that chat last week, that World Metal Congress project has officially been launched. You can find their Facebook page at facebook.com/World Metal Congress and their website at www.worldmetalcongress.org. And they have their first event taking place on March 22nd and 23rd at Rich Mix in London, with guests and panellists including the likes of Daniel P. Carter, Dom Lawson and Barney Greenway, plus loads more, and live music from Wormrot from Singapore and Zombies Ate My Girlfriend from South Africa. So get that checked out and get involved. And Alex also mentioned the Heavy Metal Truants in there. You can find out all about them at heavymetaltruants.com, and thank you very much to Alex for taking the time to talk to us. Okay, we're going to finish off tonight's show with some more music, as our Bloodstock 2016 Saturday night headliners Mastodon have been over here in the UK for the last few weeks, playing to huge crowds everywhere. So we're going to play a bit of them, but first I'm going to pop in a tune from one of their support bands who have not yet played Bloodstock, but who I think would put on a great show in the Sophie tent. And that's not just because their bassist Nick happens to be a friend of mine. This is a band called Mutoid Man with a fantastic song called Kiss of Death. And we'll follow that up with Mastodon and Black Tongue. And we'll see you next time on Bloodstock Radio podcast number 58. This is Squatter, and this is Mutoid Man.
Gig updates. fans, for the fans. Bloodstock Radio.